Report 1, Marco. It was a few months ago, but it feels like yesterday. It all started when I met Rosalia on Instagram. I was scrolling without paying much attention when a photo of her appeared in my feed. I can't explain it, but something in that image gave me chills. I liked it, and without thinking much, left a comment. To my surprise, she replied. We started exchanging messages and, dude, it was like we had known each other for years. We spent time chatting online for a while. Each day that passed, I felt closer to Rosalia. We had similar tastes, the same kind of goofy humor. After a few weeks, I mustered up the courage and asked her out. Man, I was so nervous. Our first date was at a cafe near her university. I arrived there sweating bullets, thinking I was going to mess up. But when I saw her, it was like all the nerves vanished. The conversation flowed even better in person. Things progressed naturally after that. We started seeing each other frequently and soon we were dating. I was on cloud 9, like when everything seems to be going right in your life. Rosalia was incredible. We got along super well. But suddenly, I realized something was wrong. She started to be quieter, kind of distant. I'd ask if everything was okay, but she always dodged the issue. That started to worry me a ton. One night, after dinner at her place, Rosalia finally spilled the beans. Dude, I wasn't prepared for what she told me. There was a guy, Marco, who had been harassing her for a while. She met him in a university class. They did a group project together, and since then the jerk wouldn't leave her alone. At first, she thought he was just a brainless guy, but things started getting more and more twisted. Rosalia showed me the messages Marco was sending her. Man, it made my blood run cold. The guy knew details about her routine, talked about things that only someone who was watching her could know. She had blocked him everywhere, but Marco always found a way. He created fake profiles, used different numbers. Rosalia was visibly terrified telling all this. I got pissed off, wanted to go after the guy immediately. But she asked me to calm down, said she didn't want to make things worse. I tried to convince Rosalia to go to the police, but she was afraid. She said she didn't have enough evidence, that they would think she was exaggerating. I didn't agree, but I respected it. We agreed to be more alert. I started accompanying her whenever I could. For a while, things seemed to calm down. Marco disappeared for a few weeks and we even started to relax a bit. But dude, that was just the calm before the storm. As Valentine's Day was approaching, hell broke loose again. Marco came back with everything. The messages became more intense, more aggressive. He started sending photos of Rosalia in places she had been, proving he was following her. One night, she called me crying. She had found flowers at her apartment door, with a terrifying note from Marco. That's when I lost my patience. I told Rosalia we had to do something, that this had gone way beyond all limits. That night, I couldn't sleep a wink. I spent the whole time imagining what that crazy guy could do. When dawn broke, I went to pick up Rosalia to go to the police station. She was shaking, but determined. We spent the whole morning there, giving statements, showing evidence. The officer who attended us listened to everything carefully, said they would investigate. We left there with a mix of relief and fear. We believed we had done the right thing, but we had no idea what was about to come. That day at the police station was just the beginning of the nightmare we were going to live. We left the police station not knowing what to do next. It was like we had lost our footing. Rosalia was devastated. I felt useless for not being able to protect her. We decided to go to my house, thinking it would be safer there. On the way, we kept looking back all the time, paranoid, believing we were being followed. Arriving home, I locked all the doors and windows. Rosalia sat on the couch, hugging her knees, looking like a scared child. I was trying to appear strong, but inside I was panicking. I kept pacing back and forth thinking about what we could do. That's when my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered immediately, thinking it could be the police. Dude, when I heard the voice on the other end of the line, my blood froze. It was Marco. He spoke in a calm tone, as if it was the most normal thing in the world. He said he was happy we had gone to the police, that now the game was getting more interesting. He said Rosalia looked beautiful when scared. I looked at her and realized he must be watching us at that very moment. I started yelling, asking where he was, what he wanted. Marco just laughed and hung up. I ran to the window, trying to see if there was anyone on the street, but I didn't see anything suspicious. Rosalia was in shock, trembling. I called the police station back, told them what had happened. They said they would send a patrol, but it could take a while. The wait seemed like an eternity. Every noise, every shadow made me jump. Rosalia wouldn't stop crying. I tried to calm her down, but I wasn't calm myself. That's when the power went out. Suddenly, we were in total darkness. I grabbed my phone to use the flashlight and saw I had a new message. It was a photo of us, sitting on the couch, taken from outside the house. The message said, "Knock knock, can I come in?" Dude, at that moment I went crazy. I grabbed Rosalia by the arm and ran to the bedroom. I locked the door and pushed the wardrobe in front of it. We stayed there, in the dark, hugging, listening to every noise in the house. The creaking of the floor, the wind hitting the window. Everything seemed to be Marco approaching. I was sweating cold. My heart felt like it was going to explode. After what seemed like an eternity, we heard sirens approaching. I never felt so relieved in my life to see those blue and red lights. We came out of the room slowly, still afraid. When I opened the front door, 2 police officers were there. I explained everything that had happened, showed them the messages. They came in, checked the whole house but found nothing. The police stayed for a while, asked more questions, wrote everything down. They said they would increase patrols in the area, that we should be calm. But how can you be calm after all this? When they left, Rosalia and I just stood there not knowing what to do. The power had come back, but the feeling of fear didn't go away. We didn't know if Marco was still nearby, if he would come back, what he wanted. That night was the longest of my life. The night passed and dawn came, but we didn't sleep a wink. We stayed there, sitting on the couch, staring at the door as if Marco could knock it down and enter at any moment. Rosalia was exhausted, with huge dark circles under her eyes, and I probably didn't look much different. We decided she would stay at my house for a few days, at least until we had some news from the police. I called my work and said I couldn't come in. Rosalia did the same with the university. We were afraid to even go out to buy food. I asked my brother to bring us some things, without going into details about what was happening. I didn't want to involve anyone else in this madness. Around noon, we received a call from the police station. They said they had identified Marco, that he had a history of harassment. The relief I felt at that moment was enormous. I thought things were finally going to be resolved. But then the officer said something that left me cold. They couldn't locate Marco. The address they had for him was fake. The afternoon went by and we were still locked in the house. I was restless, couldn't stay still. I kept walking back and forth, looking out the window. Rosalia was quiet, sitting on the couch, staring into space. Suddenly, she jumped and screamed. I ran to see what was happening and she showed me her phone. She had received a photo. It was the front of my house, taken at that exact moment. Dude, at that moment I went completely crazy. I ran outside, looking everywhere, shouting Marco's name. The neighbors came out to see what was happening. I must have looked like a madman, yelling in the middle of the street. But I didn't see anyone suspicious, no sign of Marco. I went back inside, trembling, not knowing what to do. Rosalia was crying again. She kept repeating that it was her fault, that she shouldn't have involved me in this. I tried to calm her down, told her we were going to solve this together. But the truth is, I was as lost as she was. How do you deal with a crazy person who seems to be everywhere and nowhere at the same time? It was already night when we heard a noise coming from the backyard. It sounded like someone had knocked something over. My heart immediately raced. I grabbed a baseball bat I had stored and went to check. Rosalia stayed in the living room, with her phone in hand, ready to call the police. I opened the back door slowly, trying not to make noise. The yard was dark. I could barely see well. I walked slowly, the bat firm in my hands. I got close to the noise and saw it was just a trash can that had fallen over, probably the wind or some cat. I sighed in relief and turned around to go back to the house. That's when I saw him. There was someone standing at the kitchen door looking at me. I couldn't see his face, but I knew. It was Marco. We stayed at Rosalia's parents' house for 2 weeks. At first, it was a relief. That little town was so different from ours, so peaceful. People didn't even lock their doors at night. Little by little, we started to relax. Rosalia's parents were super nice. They did everything to make us feel at home. But still, the fear never completely went away. I would wake up in the middle of the night thinking I had heard some noise. Rosalia sometimes would stand staring out the window, as if expecting to see Marco appear out of nowhere. We tried to act normal, but it was hard. I called the police every day to see if they had any news, but it was always the same. No sign of Marco. After 2 weeks, we decided it was time to go back. We couldn't keep running forever, right? Life had to go on. On the eve of our return, I was super nervous. I stayed awake for hours, thinking about everything that had happened. Was Marco still looking for us? Had he given up? It was impossible to know. The trip back was tense. Every car that passed us on the highway put me on alert. Rosalia was quiet, looking out the window. When we got home, I felt a chill. I went in first, checking all the rooms. Everything was normal, as we had left it. But still, that strange feeling wouldn't go away. The first days after coming back were difficult. We returned to work, to university, but it was like we were always looking over our shoulder. I installed cameras at home, changed all the locks. Rosalia started taking self-defense classes. We were trying to regain control, but deep down, we still had that fear. A week after our return, something weird happened. I was coming back from work when I saw a guy who looked like Marco on the street. Dude, my heart almost stopped. I stood there like an idiot in the middle of the sidewalk, staring at the guy. He walked past me without even noticing me. It wasn't Marco. I realized I was becoming paranoid, seeing him everywhere. Rosalia had moments like that too. Once she called me in the middle of the day, terrified, saying she had received a strange message. I ran to meet her thinking the nightmare had returned. But when I got there, it was just a spam message. We felt relieved, but at the same time kind of frustrated. It was like we couldn't distinguish between real danger and what was just our imagination playing tricks on us. Days went by and nothing happened. No sign of Marco, no strange messages, nothing. Little by little, we started getting back to normal, or at least to the new normal. Because, dude, after everything that happened, we never went back to being the same. That fear, that feeling of being watched, never completely went away. Even today, sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night thinking I heard something. Rosalia still gets tense when she sees someone who looks like Marco on the street. Report 2. Tinder encounter. I never imagined that a simple match on Tinder could turn into the nightmare of my life. It all started a few weeks ago when I liked Rodrigo's profile. He seemed like a normal guy, Handsome, with a good sense of humor, with cool photos in interesting places. We started chatting and the conversation flowed super well. He was attentive, asked me questions about myself, and seemed really interested. After a few days of exchanging messages, he invited me out. I confess I got a little nervous, but also excited. We agreed to meet at a bar I liked near my house. I thought it would be safer since it was a place I knew well. When I arrived at the bar, Rodrigo was already there waiting for me. He was even more handsome in person, with a captivating smile and piercing green eyes. The conversation flowed naturally. We talked about our lives, work, common interests. He made me laugh several times and seemed to be genuinely interested in getting to know me better. As the night progressed, we got closer. The vibe was great, and I felt increasingly attracted to him. After a few hours at the bar, between drinks and laughter, Rodrigo suggested going to my place. I hesitated for a moment. After all, I'm not used to taking someone home on the first date, but something about him made me feel safe, as if we had known each other for a long time. I accepted the invitation and we went to my apartment together. Arriving at my place, things heated up quickly. The attraction between us was undeniable, and soon we were kissing intensely. One thing led to another, and we ended up in bed. It was an incredible night. Rodrigo was affectionate and attentive. After a few hours of sex, we fell asleep in each other's arms. I felt on cloud nine, thinking that maybe I had found someone special. Little did I know that the nightmare was about to begin. I woke up in the early hours to a strange noise coming from the bathroom. I looked to the side and saw that Rodrigo was no longer in bed. Confused and still half asleep, I got up to see what was happening. When I got near the bathroom, I heard sounds of things breaking and being dragged. My heart started racing. "Rodrigo, is everything okay?" I asked, softly knocking on the door. There was no response, just more sounds of destruction. I started to get really scared. What the hell was going on? I tried to open the door, but it was locked. The sounds became increasingly violent, as if someone was tearing apart the entire bathroom. Suddenly, I heard an even louder crash, and the bathroom door violently swung open. Rodrigo came out of there like a hurricane, unrecognizable. His eyes were bulging, injected with fury, and he was covered in water and... Was that blood? I was paralyzed with fear. He passed by me as if I didn't even exist, grabbed his clothes scattered around the room and started dressing frantically. I couldn't understand what was happening. "Rodrigo, what happened? Are you okay?" I tried to ask, but my voice came out shaky and low. He looked at me for a second, and I swear I saw something diabolical in that gaze. Without saying a word, he ran towards the living room door and left, slamming it so hard I thought it was going to break. I stood there, in the middle of the living room, trying to process what had just happened. My whole body was shaking, and I felt a mix of fear and confusion. After a few minutes, I could finally move. I went to the bathroom and almost fainted at what I saw. It looked like a tornado had passed through there. The mirror was broken. There were pieces of glass everywhere. The towels were torn and thrown on the wet floor. The shower curtain had been ripped off, and the sink was clogged, overflowing with dirty water. And the worst part, there were bloodstains on the walls and floor. It wasn't much, but it was enough to send me into a panic. What the fuck had happened? This couldn't be the same kind and affectionate guy I had spent the night with. With trembling hands, I grabbed my cell phone and called the police. I could barely form coherent sentences as I tried to explain what had happened. The operator told me a patrol car would be on its way in a few minutes. While I waited, I paced back and forth in the living room, nervously looking out the window, afraid that Rodrigo might come back. Every noise made me jump. My mind wouldn't stop creating horrible scenarios. What if he had hurt someone? What if he came back to attack me? I felt completely vulnerable and stupid for having brought a stranger to my home. When the police arrived about 15 minutes later, I was almost having a panic attack. 2 officers entered the apartment and started asking questions. I explained everything that had happened, from the Tinder match to Rodrigo's bizarre escape. They inspected the destroyed bathroom and took photos. One of the officers stayed with me in the living room while the other went out to check the building's security cameras and talk to the neighbors. I was still in shock, trying to understand how a night that started so well had turned into this nightmare. That's when the officer who was with me asked a question that left me terrified. "By any chance, do you know this Rodrigo's full name?" I replied that I only knew his first name, Rodrigo, and showed him his Tinder profile. The officer took my phone and started analyzing the photos with a serious expression. Suddenly, he made a radio call and began talking rapidly with someone, using codes I didn't understand. I stood there watching, feeling my heart beat faster and faster. Something was wrong, very wrong. When he hung up the radio, he turned to me with a grave expression that made me even more nervous. "Look, I need you to stay calm," he said, but his tone of voice did exactly the opposite. "The man who was here tonight, well, he's a fugitive wanted by the police. Rodrigo Mendez, that's his full name. He's a suspect in 3 serial murders in recent months." I felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath my feet. My vision blurred for a moment, and I had to sit down. A murderer. I had slept with a murderer. The officer's words echoed in my head as I tried to process the information. How could I have been so naive? How did I not notice anything strange? The officer continued explaining the situation, but I could barely hear. My mind was racing, reviewing every moment of the night, every detail of Rodrigo's behavior. How did I not notice anything suspicious? He seemed so normal, so charming. The officer informed me that they were mobilizing teams to try to capture Rodrigo, but the chances that he was still in the area were slim. They were going to increase patrols in the area and station a patrol car in front of my building as a precaution. All of this seemed too unreal. I spent the rest of the early morning giving my statement, answering thousands of questions, and trying to remember every tiny detail that could help the investigation. When the police finally left, it was already dawn. I sat there on the couch staring into space. The apartment, which was once my refuge, now seemed like a strange and threatening place. Every shadow, every noise scared me. I couldn't stop thinking that I had shared my bed with a murderer. What if he had decided to kill me too? Why did he destroy my bathroom like that? These were questions that wouldn't leave my head. In the days that followed, I could barely sleep or eat. I alternated between moments of panic and a feeling of emotional numbness. I changed all the locks in the apartment and installed an alarm system, but I still didn't feel safe. Every time the phone rang or someone knocked on the door, I felt my heart racing. My friends tried to console me, saying it wasn't my fault, that there was no way I could have known. But the truth is, I felt like a complete idiot. How could I have been so careless? A week after the incident, something strange happened. I was returning home from work. It was around 8 p.m. When I got to my floor, I noticed that the door to my apartment was slightly open. I froze in the hallway, panic taking over me. I was sure I had closed the door in the morning. With trembling hands, I grabbed my phone to call the police. That's when I heard a noise coming from inside the apartment, as if someone had dropped something. My blood ran cold. Could it be that Rodrigo had come back? I didn't wait to find out. I ran down the stairs as fast as I could, almost tripping on the steps. I arrived breathless at the building's reception and practically yelled at the doorman to call the police. I quickly explained the situation, and we waited at the entrance, my heart beating so hard I thought it was going to explode. When the patrol car arrived, about 10 minutes later, I accompanied the officers to my floor. They drew their weapons and entered the apartment carefully. I stayed in the hallway, trembling, expecting to hear gunshots or screams. But after a few minutes, one of the officers came out and said there was no one inside. They did a complete sweep and found no signs of forced entry or anything out of place. I entered the apartment still scared, looking into every corner. Everything was exactly as I had left it in the morning. The officers suggested that I might have forgotten to lock the door in my rush, and that the noise could have been something falling on its own. But I was sure that wasn't it. I spent the night wide awake, sitting in the living room, staring at the door. I couldn't stop thinking that Rodrigo had been there, that he had come back. But why? What did he want? These questions still haunt me to this day. Sometimes, when I'm alone at home, I have the feeling of being watched. I know it might just be paranoia, after effects of the trauma I experienced. Report 3. Adventure with Diego. I never imagined I'd be here sharing this story, but I need to get this off my chest about what happened to me. My name is Elena, and I'm going to tell you about the day that changed my life forever. It was February 14th, Valentine's Day, and the streets of Mexico City were filled with couples in love and flower vendors. I was nervous, my heart in my hand, going to meet Diego at his taco shop in Condesa. Diego was my husband, Jose Luis's best friend. We had known each other since our university days at UNAM. Jose Luis and I had been married for 24 years. We had 2 kids and an apparently perfect life in the Roma neighborhood. But the truth is, our marriage had been cold for a long time. Jose Luis was always buried in his work as a lawyer, and I felt lonely. That's how I got closer to Diego. At first, it was just to vent. He listened to me, gave me attention. One thing led to another, and, well, we started having an affair. It had been going on for almost 2 years. I felt guilty, of course, but at the same time, I couldn't stop. Diego made me feel alive again. That day, I was supposed to meet Diego at his taco shop. We were always careful not to raise suspicions, but I think deep down I knew that at some point, the bomb was going to explode. When I arrived near the taco shop, I saw Jose Luis's car parked haphazardly in front. My blood ran cold. I knew something very bad was about to happen. I ran into the taco shop, and the scene I saw left me in shock. Jose Luis was there, completely upset, yelling at Diego. You could smell the tequila from far away. Customers were running out, scared. I tried to approach, to calm the situation, but Jose Luis wouldn't even listen to me. Jose Luis was shouting accusations at Diego. I had never seen Jose Luis like this. He had always been calm, controlled. Now he seemed like a different person. He grabbed a bottle of tequila and threw it in Diego's direction. Luckily, he missed. The pieces of glass scattered across the floor of the taco shop. I begged Jose Luis to calm down, tried to explain, but it was useless. He was blind with rage. That's when he pulled out a gun from his pocket. My heart stopped. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Jose Luis, my husband, pointing a weapon at Diego, his best friend. Because of me, at that moment, guilt hit me like a punch in the stomach. Jose Luis was speaking with a broken voice. I could see the pain in his eyes, a pain that Diego and I had caused. Diego tried to speak, to explain, but Jose Luis didn't want to listen. I kept pleading, crying, trying to get him to lower the gun, but it was as if I wasn't even there. I was completely desperate, not knowing what to do. Diego tried to approach Jose Luis, speaking softly, trying to calm the situation, but that only seemed to enrage Jose Luis more. He yelled again, advancing towards Diego. Police sirens started to sound in the distance. Someone must have called the authorities. Part of me felt relieved, but I knew they wouldn't arrive in time. Jose Luis was out of control. I had never seen him like this in all the years of our marriage. It was as if he was another person. Jose Luis said something to Diego, his voice lower now, almost a whisper. I saw a tear run down his face, and my heart broke. At that moment, I realized the damage we had done. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was the destruction of years of friendship, of trust. Diego started to speak again, but he was interrupted by the deafening sound of the gunshot. I screamed in shock. I saw Diego look down at the bloodstains spreading on his shirt. His legs weakened, and he slid to the floor. I couldn't believe what was happening. It was like a nightmare. I ran towards Diego, but Jose Luis stopped me. I struggled, screamed, cried. Diego was there on the floor, bleeding, and I couldn't do anything to help him. The sirens were closer now. I saw Jose Luis looking at the gun in his hand, as if he couldn't believe what he had just done. I finally managed to break free and ran to Diego. I held his hand, feeling the warm blood between my fingers. I talked to him, begging him to hang on. That help was coming. But deep down, I knew it was too late. I could see the life escaping from his eyes. The man I loved was dying in my arms, and it was all my fault. The police arrived shortly after. Everything became a blur of lights, sirens, and voices. I saw them handcuff Jose Luis, who didn't resist. He seemed to be in a state of shock. The paramedics tried to revive Diego, but it was no use. They declared him dead right there on the floor of his taco shop. I stayed there, sitting on the floor, covered in blood, while the police asked questions. I answered mechanically, without really processing what was happening. An affair that had started so innocently had ended in tragedy. The following hours passed like a blur. They took me to the police station, where I spent hours answering questions. The police wanted to know all the details of my relationship with Diego, how it had started, how long it had been going on. Each question was like a stab in my chest, making me relive the whole situation. Meanwhile, Jose Luis was being processed. They charged him with homicide and took him to jail. I couldn't believe that my husband, the man I had built a life with, was now behind bars. Guilt consumed me. If I hadn't cheated on him, none of this would have happened. The days that followed were a nightmare. The news spread quickly through the city. Suddenly, I was the topic of all conversations, the scandal of the moment. Our neighbors in the Roma neighborhood, who used to treat us like the perfect couple, now looked at me with contempt. I could hear the whispers when I walked down the street. The worst part was telling our children. Seeing the pain and confusion in their eyes destroyed me. How do you explain that Mom had cheated on Dad with Uncle Diego, and now Dad was in prison for killing Uncle Diego? They were devastated, unable to understand how our family had fallen apart overnight. Diego's family blamed me for his death. Jose Luis's family blamed me for his imprisonment. And me? I blamed myself for everything. Every night I lay awake, going over the events of that fateful day, thinking of all the things I could have done differently. Diego's funeral was another terrible moment. I wanted to be there to say goodbye, but I knew I wouldn't be welcome. I found out later that it was a beautiful ceremony, full of friends and customers from the taco shop who came to pay their last respects. The thought that I had taken away his chance to continue his life, his business, tormented me. Weeks turned into months. Jose Luis's trial was approaching. They would call me as a witness. The idea of having to recount everything in a courtroom, in front of a jury, terrified me. But I knew I had no choice. It was the consequence of my actions. Meanwhile, I tried to pick up the pieces of my life. I had to sell our house in Roma. The memories were too much to bear, and I needed the money to pay bills and lawyers. I moved with the kids to a small apartment in Coyoacan, ironically close to where Jose Luis and I had met so many years ago. The day of the trial finally arrived. Entering that courtroom was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. Seeing Jose Luis there, wearing a prison uniform, so different from the man I knew, broke my heart. When they called me to testify, my legs were shaking. I had to tell the whole story, every sordid detail of my affair with Diego, in front of a room full of strangers. Jose Luis's lawyer argued that he had acted in a moment of passion, blinded by betrayal. The prosecutor, on the other hand, painted the picture of a calculating man who had planned the murder. The truth, I knew, was somewhere in between. Jose Luis wasn't a cold-blooded killer, but it wasn't just a momentary lapse either. After days of testimonies and arguments, the jury retired to deliberate. They were the longest hours of my life. When they returned, the verdict was announced. Guilty, but with mitigating circumstances. Jose Luis was sentenced to 15 years in prison. I didn't know whether to feel relieved or devastated. In a way, it seemed like we had all received a prison sentence that day. The months that followed were an exercise in survival. I had to learn to be a single mother, to deal with social stigma, to find a new purpose in life. I got a job as a secretary in a law firm. A cruel irony, considering Jose Luis's profession. But it was an honest job and allowed me to support my children. The visits to the prison were always tense. Jose Luis oscillated between moments of deep remorse and outbursts of anger. Sometimes he blamed me for everything. Other times he begged for my forgiveness. I never knew what to expect. Our children went with me sometimes, but it was difficult for them to see their father in that situation. Gradually, the visits became less frequent. Diego's taco shop was sold. Whenever I passed through Condesa, I avoided looking at the place. But sometimes, without wanting to, I would find myself remembering the moments we spent there. The guilt never went away completely, but over time, I learned to live with it. One day, I received a call from the prison. Jose Luis had been stabbed during a fight between inmates. He survived, but the incident changed him profoundly. On the next visit, he seemed like a different man. He asked for forgiveness, not just from me, but also asked me to convey his remorse to Diego's family. It was the first time in years that I saw a glimpse of the man I had fallen in love with so many years ago. Report 4. Helium Doll. It all started when I decided to download Tinder after ending a long relationship. I just wanted to meet new people, no strings attached. At first, it was a normal experience. I exchanged messages with several guys, nothing out of the ordinary. Then, I matched with Helium. Helium's profile seemed ordinary. Normal photos. A simple bio. We started chatting, and he came across as polite and interested. After a few days of messaging, Helium suggested we meet. I hesitated at first, but his persistence ended up convincing me. We agreed to meet at a cafe near my house. I chose a public place as a precaution. When I arrived, Helium was already waiting for me. He looked like his profile pictures, which initially put me at ease. He stood up to greet me, pulled out the chair, showing kindness. The conversation started typically for a first date. We talked about work and interests. Helium worked in IT and cracked jokes about it. As time passed, I noticed strange behaviors. His compliments about my appearance became excessive and frequent. Then Helium started asking invasive questions. He wanted to know details about where I lived, if I lived alone, my daily routine. I tried to change the subject, but he insisted on these questions. My discomfort grew, but I tried to stay calm because we were in a public place. The situation worsened when Helium mentioned previous relationships. He talked about an ex-girlfriend, claiming we were identical. He said we had the same way of speaking, smiling, and even dressing. His tone was obsessive. I tried to divert the conversation several times, unsuccessfully. He insisted that we were soulmates, that I was the woman of his life. At that point, I was scared. I made up an engagement to leave. Helium looked visibly upset, insisting that I stay longer. When he saw I was determined to leave, he asked for my number. I gave it to him, just to end the situation quickly. I said goodbye and hurriedly left the cafe. Looking back, I saw Helium still sitting there, watching me with a disturbing gaze. At home, I immediately blocked Helium on Tinder. I thought the episode was over. I was wrong. 2 hours later, I started receiving numerous messages from an unknown number. It was Helium. The first messages seemed normal, asking if I had arrived home safely, saying he enjoyed meeting me. Then, the situation turned truly terrifying. Helium started sending increasingly frequent and intense messages. He talked about our future together, about how we had a special connection. I ignored all the messages, hoping he would take the hint, but the messages kept coming. With each passing hour, the tone became more aggressive and desperate. The next day, I woke up to over 100 unread messages. Helium had spent the entire night texting me. Some were declarations of love. Others were accusations that I was purposely ignoring him. There were even veiled threats, saying that if I didn't respond, he would have to take more drastic measures. I decided to block his number, thinking that would solve the problem. For a few hours, I had peace. But then, emails started coming in, dozens of them. Helium had discovered my personal email address. The messages varied between apology requests and more threats. He said he couldn't live without me, that I was the only person who understood him. The situation was becoming unbearable. I started feeling watched all the time. I had the constant sensation that someone was following me. When I left the house, I looked over my shoulder every few steps. At work, I tensed up every time the phone rang. My boss even asked if everything was okay, noticing my nervousness. A week after our meeting, I received a package at home. It had no return address. When I opened it, my blood ran cold. It was a handmade doll, with hair and clothes identical to mine. The doll's face was a photo of me, cut out from one of my social media profiles. Along with the doll, there was a handwritten note. "Now I can have you forever." I panicked. I locked all the doors and windows in the house. I called a friend who came to stay with me. We decided to call the police. When the officers arrived, I explained the whole situation. They took the doll as evidence and advised me to file a harassment report. In the following days, I lived in a constant state of alert. I changed the locks on the house, installed security cameras. My friends took turns staying with me so I wouldn't be alone. Even so, the messages kept coming. Helium used different numbers, created new emails. It seemed impossible to escape. One night, I woke up to a strange noise coming from the living room. My heart raced. I grabbed my cell phone to call the police, but the line was dead. I heard footsteps approaching my room. The doorknob started to turn slowly. At that moment, I felt a fear I had never experienced before. The door opened slowly, creaking. I was paralyzed with fear, could barely breathe. To my relief, it was just my cat that had knocked something over in the living room. But that moment of terror made me realize that I couldn't keep living like this. I decided I needed to take more drastic measures. The next day, I went to the police station again. I showed all the messages, emails, and photos that Helium had sent. The commander, seeing the gravity of the situation, issued a restraining order against him. He also advised me to change my phone numbers and emails and make all my social media private. I followed all the advice. I changed my number, created new emails, deleted my Tinder profile, and made all my social media private. For a few days, I had peace. I didn't receive any messages from Helium. I started feeling safer, thinking that maybe he had finally understood that he should leave me alone. 2 weeks later, I was ready to move. I had found a job in a city 300 kilometers away. I didn't tell anyone other than my family and closest friends about my plans.